Hi, it's Miss Marsden, and I'm going to be taking you through your second lesson for this week, which is biology. And we're going to be focusing on biotic and abiotic factors. So what I want you to be able to do by the end of this lesson is to be able to identify both biotic and abiotic factors within an ecosystem. Ecosystems we talked about last week, so you should be able to confidently define that already. I want you to be able to describe and explain how a change in a biotic or an abiotic factor can affect an organism and its community. You also need to be able to extract and interpret information from secondary data from a range of types of graphs. So please make sure you have a pen ready, 2 different coloured pens preferably. You need the booklet from the Continuity of Learning folder in front of you, and I'd recommend doing this on paper. So make sure you turn your phone off, please. Don't have any distractions open on your computer. You need to make sure you answer all the questions that you're asked to in the booklet, and to give yourself long enough to be able to do that by pausing the video when necessary. We make these videos this way so you can easily rewind them and listen to them again if you're not sure. And obviously it is difficult to get your head around this when you don't have your teacher here to help you, but please give it your best shot. Please don't give up on it. So first task, you've got a fluency test in your booklet. I'd like you to give yourself about 10 minutes to complete this. Again, if you struggle with terms like independent variable, then just use bite size to go through it, because we have gone through all these skills throughout the last few years in science, but I know that it is difficult when you don't have your teacher there to help you at all times, okay? So give yourself about 10 minutes, pause the video, we'll mark this together. So the mark scheme's in the Continuity of Learning folder. Please go through and give yourself a mark out of 15. You should see a gradual improvement over time if you do use these mark schemes properly. You will get to know what we are looking for and how to be successful on these fluency tests. The only one that might be a little bit confusing is where you're asked to draw your equipment. So if you want to leave that one out, that is totally understandable, but you should have drawn the list of equipment which is stated. So today's do now task, which is in the booklet, you've got 5 questions. This is based on what we did last week in terms of food chains and ecosystems. I'd give yourself about 5 minutes to do this, so pause the videos for as long as you need to answer the do now questions, please. We're going to go through them on the next slide. Most of these questions are straightforward. So one species within an ecosystem is a population. If we were talking about all the species within an ecosystem, we would talk about a community. So any that you manage to get for number 5, please give yourself a tick. Please add any extra ones in a different colour that you missed, so you get used to being able to list all of them. Any that you didn't get in a different colour pen, what I would like you to do is put it into a full sentence so that you're actively thinking about your feedback. So for example, for number 3, if I didn't get that one right, I would say an organism that always starts off a food chain is a green plant. Take as long as you need to improve your answers, and then resume the video once you're ready. So, 2 keywords that we're talking about in today's lesson, that's biotic and abiotic factors. So we're starting off with abiotic factors. An abiotic means non-living. So A means non, bio, living. So an abiotic factor is a non-living part of the environment that can often have a major influence on living organisms. So they include the light intensity, temperature, water levels, pH and the mineral content of the soil, the wind intensity and direction, so how strong the wind is and the direction of it. If you're a plant, carbon dioxide levels matter. And if you're an aquatic animal, then the oxygen levels in the water matter for you as well. All of these are non-living factors, so they are known as abiotic factors. So therefore, a biotic factor must be a living factor which can affect a community of organisms. So they would be the availability of food, number of predators, new pathogens, so that's your bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. They're all living organisms. Even a virus is a living organism. One species outcompeting another is also a living factor because the other species is alive. That might be a fungus outcompeting a plant. It might be a red squirrel outcompeting a grey squirrel, for example. So we're going to start off talking about the effect of abiotic factors. And you've got a graph on the left-hand side. Along the x-axis, we've got the pH. So we're talking about the pH of water in a freshwater ecosystem. Up the y-axis, we've got numbers of species. So effectively, this is like a bar chart. So what you can see is that frogs, they thrive in a lower pH, so a pH of 4. And you can tell that clams, for example, thrive more at a pH of 6.5. So a decrease in pH to below 6, so more acidic. It would mean that the clams and snails decrease. Other species may increase as long as they don't depend on those clams and snails for food. So if your frogs depend on snails for food, for example, then they would decrease as well because the snails have died because of the pH level. Biotic factor graphs are usually a little bit more easier to understand. So notice how we've got two axes on this graph. So we've got the number of wolves on this side, and we've got the number of moose on this side. You need to notice that these axes aren't the same. So this axis for the moose is much higher. It goes up to 2,000, whereas we've only got a maximum of 60 wolves on this side. So they're not actually directly comparable in terms of the numbers. So you need to be careful when you're reading the axes. So what we can see, the wolves is the red line. So if I have an increase in the number of moose, like here, over time that causes the number of wolves to increase as well because they've got more to eat. But just get rid of those lines. As your number of wolves have increased because they had more to eat, then they're eating more of the moose, so the number of moose come down because effectively the wolves have eaten them. But when we're talking like last lesson about interdependence, because the number of moose have come down, that causes the number of wolves to come down as well because they're interdependent on each other. So you can see that as one increases, there'll be a slight delay, but the other one will increase as well. And you can see that they're totally interdependent on each other in terms of that feeding relationship and predator and prey. So you've got an image of a coral reef here. What I would like you to do is identify one biotic factor, which is a living thing, and one abiotic factor, which is a non-living factor, which is impacting those organisms about this ecosystem. What I would like you to do also is to give a potential impact of change in each one of your biotic and abiotic factors. So if I use the pH of the water as an example of my abiotic factor, my potential impact is that the coral would die. Then I could go on to say if the coral dies, what would happen to the fish that live within it? They don't have a habitat, they would die as well. That is the level of detail I'm expecting you to add into this, so pause the video for as long as you need to. And if you're feeling particularly confident and you want to stretch yourself, come up with as many as you can. You don't just need one of each. So your explanations, they always need to be related to the factor that influences either survival and growth of that organism, or the opposite, the decrease in the number of that organism. So an example of an abiotic factor would be light, and the more light there is, the more photosynthesis for plants. The more plants that there are, the more there is for fish to eat, the higher the number of fish. But the higher number of fish over time, they will be eating more of the plant, so that could cause the plant to decrease. So other abiotic factors that you could have had is pH. You could have had oxygen levels in the water. You could have had temperature of the water. And for living factors, you could have had predators, disease, food supplies, and that's about it really. You need to actively think about what impact would that have on the ecosystem. So for example, when I'm talking about the green plants having more light for photosynthesis, so that's an abiotic factor, more fish would have more food. Please improve your answers using my model in terms of the level of detail that we're expecting for this task. So we're going to pause on the new knowledge and we're going to take a little check of your understanding. So you've got 5 questions and all these are related to the table which is at the top. So in the table, you've got 12 different factors. You've got a mix of biotic and abiotic factors. So question 1 says, which numbers refer to abiotic factors? A meaning non, bio living, so non-living factors. So for example, one of the numbers I would put for question 1 would be number 5, a change in light intensity, because that is an abiotic factor. Question 3 talks about microorganisms, so they're small organisms like bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungus. So pause the video for as long as you need to. Please take note of the number of marks for each one. For example, question 5 is asking for 3 factors, so it's 3 marks. You need to put 3 factors to get full marks. So pause the video for as long as you need to. So answers are on the board. Please can you mark each one that you got correct? If you wrote down them, for example, instead of number 6, you wrote parasites, it might just take you a little bit longer to mark this. But the question was asking for numbers, so always be sure that you've done exactly what the question has asked for to make sure you secure those marks. Give yourself a mark out of 17. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to watch the video which is linked on the slides. I'm not going to go through this with you, but this is just giving you a specific example of how the increase in the numbers of one organism, which in this instance is a predator, how that impacts the rest of the organisms within that ecosystem. Okay, so make notes on the video because this is a specific example of what we have just talked about. So what you can now do after you finish watching the video is you can complete the first page of the questions about biotic and abiotic factors in your booklet, please. If you don't have a copy of the booklet, like I said, just do this on paper. Pause the video for as long as you need to. So, relatively straightforward short answer questions. Please mark them and improve the answers if you didn't get any of them. So, within a habitat, it's very easy to make this simpler than it is. Like we've been talking about changing the concentration of oxygen, for example, that doesn't necessarily happen across a full habitat. So within a habitat, conditions can vary, and that creates zones. So for example, it's easy to talk about this in terms of a marine ecosystem. So the depth of the water can affect the temperature as well as the light intensity within this example of a reef. So the deeper that you go, the colder the water is and the less light there is. So within that ecosystem, the shallow areas are going to have a warmer temperature and the deeper areas will be colder. So that'll mean that different organisms survive in different zones of this habitat. So that's something that you need to bear in mind when you're talking about different habitats in an ecosystem. So we can show this in different ways. So for example, what I've got on this graph is along the x-axis it says distance from the tree line. So effectively we're going between 0 metres, which is underneath the tree, to 25 metres, which is 25 metres away from a tree. And we've got the numbers of dandelions in the shaded area in yellow and the number of grasses in the shaded area in green. A kite diagram, basically, the more shaded area that there is, the more organisms there are. So you can see at 5 metres, that's where there's more dandelions because you've got more of the yellow area shaded. But as you go along to 20 metres, there's less shaded area. So what you can tell is that there are less dandelions because there is less area shaded in green. So between 0 and 10 metres, you can see that there is a lot of dandelions because there is a lot of shaded area. But between 15 and 20 metres, the number of dandelions are decreasing. Between 20 and 25 metres, there are no dandelions. If you're describing the number of grasses, then it's more consistent. You can see that between 0 and 15 metres, you've got a relatively stable number of grasses because that green shaded area is just about the same. But between 15 and 20 metres, the number of grasses increases. And then between 20 and 25, it decreases as well. Overall, there is a lot more grasses because you can see that the green area, there is a lot more of it shaded compared to the yellow. So this is an example from a past paper. You've got at the top a diagram of a section of seashore, and at the bottom you've got a kite diagram of a student's results for a number of different plants. So you've got a bladderwrack and a sea lettuce. So what I would like you to do is, using the diagram, I'd like you to tell me what is the evidence that sea lettuce survives better in wet conditions. So sea lettuce, you can see, is the line at the bottom, and I'm looking for it surviving in wet conditions. Both of these graphs are linked, so if I look at this bar for sea lettuce, this shows me that it's a shaded area, so there is sea lettuce existing 22 metres from the shore, for example. If I go up and I look at my cross section, 22 metres from the shore, what do I have? I have a pool of seawater. So what evidence is there that the sea lettuce survives best in wet conditions? My wet conditions are obviously going to be found in the pools of seawater. So you could say at 22 and 26 metres, so this range, there is sea lettuce found. This is where there is a pool of seawater. What I would like you to do using that example is to suggest what other evidence is there that sea lettuce survives better in wet conditions, using specific labels from the graph like I just did. And then also tell me what other conclusions can you draw from the data in terms of the bladder wrack as well. So, sea lettuce is only found in rock pools and only in water, so that shows it thrives in wet conditions. One more. You could have also said that the bladder wrack is found further up the shore and it doesn't necessarily need wet conditions to survive. So well done if you got both of those. So what I'd like you to do now, using the notes that we've just gone through, is to complete the second page of questions on the biotic and abiotic factors task. Pause it for as long as you need to as usual, and then we're going to go through the questions together on the next slide. So, please mark your answers and give yourself a mark out of 4. And the point of these questions is it's developing our understanding. We're now talking about zones within an ecosystem and not just talking about an ecosystem as a whole. So last thing I'd like you to do is have a go at completing the exam questions in your booklet, please. Please make sure you're focusing on the key words. So describe, explain and compare are different like we talked about last week, but the descriptions of what you do for each one are there if you need them. Please remember to send a picture of your work to your class teacher. And please make sure that you complete your Educate quiz on this content by Monday at 8 AM. Any problems, please let your teacher know. And good luck.